Ever since I can remember, I've heard stories about strange phone calls. Those reports of whispered voices on the phone, unknown numbers calling in the middle of the night, and worst of all, calls from people who had already died. I always thought all of this was an exaggeration, a kind of modern urban legend. But what happened to me changed my perception forever. It was a rainy night and I was home alone. My cell phone started ringing insistently and I looked at the screen. Private number. I answered hesitantly. Hello? The silence on the other end was dense, filled with something I couldn't identify. Then heavy breathing began. Can you hear me? I asked, trying to sound firm, but my heart was already racing. The voice that answered was low, almost a whisper. Don't hang up. A shiver ran down my spine. Before I could say anything, the call ended. I stared at the phone, feeling a growing anxiety. A joke? A prank? I decided to ignore it, but my mind couldn't erase that sound. Something told me that it wasn't normal. The calls continued over the next few nights. Always from the same private number. And always the same voice repeating. Don't hang up. One night, I decided to record the call. When I played the audio, I almost dropped the phone. In addition to the breathing and the voice, there was another sound in the background. A cry, low, muffled, almost as if it were on the other side of a wall. I froze. I decided to investigate. I started searching the internet for similar cases. I found forums of people reporting similar experiences. Some believed that these calls were echoes from the afterlife, attempts by spirits to communicate. Others said that answering this type of call could open a portal to something much worse. I still didn't know what to believe. But then everything got worse. One night, the call came from a number that made me freeze. It was my mother's number. The problem? My mother had died 3 years ago. My hands were shaking as I answered. Hello? My voice was barely audible. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't an unknown whisper. It was her. My mother. Son. My heart raced. The sound was muffled as if she were very far away, but it was unmistakable. Mom? I asked, feeling tears forming in my eyes. Don't hang up, was all she said before the line went dead again. I threw the phone away, my breathing was out of control. How was that possible? My entire body was covered in cold sweat. I spent the night awake, waiting for another call. But this time the phone was silent. In the following days, I began to research about calls from the dead. I discovered that in many cultures, there is a belief that the dead can try to communicate through electronic devices. But there was one detail that terrified me even more. In some cases, these calls were not from the person who seemed to be calling. Something, or someone, could be pretending to be that person. I needed answers. I decided to visit a medium known for dealing with phenomena of this kind. When I explained what was happening, he was silent for a moment, then said, "You answered a call you shouldn't have." I swallowed hard. What does that mean? He sighed as if trying to choose his words carefully. Some entities can use the voices of those they love to lure us in. If this call is really from your mother, she may be trying to warn you of something. But if it's not? He didn't need to finish the sentence. I already knew what it meant. That night the call came again. I looked at the phone and saw my mother's name flashing on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. This time her voice didn't sound so far away. Son? Mom, is that really you? What's going on? I need to tell you, he's listening to you. My hair stood on end. Oh, what are you talking about? Listening carefully, I noticed a sound behind her voice. Another breath, but this one wasn't human. It was guttural, deep, filled with something that made my stomach turn. Run, was the last thing my mother said before the line went completely dead. At that exact moment, a loud knock echoed on my front door. I didn't answer it. That night, the silence became unbearable. I sat on the couch, holding my phone tightly, waiting for any sound. But nothing happened. Until, in the corner of the room, I saw something. A shadow, standing watching me. I wanted to run, scream, do anything, but my body wouldn't respond. The figure began to move slowly, crawling toward me. The air became thick, heavy, and a feeling of despair overcame me. My cell phone vibrated in my hand. It was another call. I answered it, trembling. Don't look at it, my mother's voice whispered. My eyes were fixed on the creature. It extended a skeletal hand toward me and my phone fell to the floor. Before I could react, everything went dark. I woke up the next morning, alone in the living room. My phone was off, the battery completely drained. The call stopped. But since that day, every night, I feel like something is watching me from the darkness. Traveling has always been my passion. But one trip in particular left me with scars I will never forget. It was a simple hotel far from the city, perfect for a quiet night after a long car trip. At check-in, the attendant gave me a strange look when he saw my room number, 303. "Are you sure you want to stay in this room?" he asked hesitantly. I thought the question was strange, but I just nodded. He sighed and handed over the key. I went up in the elevator, feeling a strange shiver. When I opened the door to room 303, everything seemed normal. The bed was made, the television was off, a lamp next to the desk. But there was one disturbing detail. The bathroom mirror was completely covered with a black sheet. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was some renovation or a previous guest who had done this out of superstition. But when I got closer, I noticed something worse. There were finger marks coming out from under the fabric, as if someone had touched the mirror from behind it. I felt a shiver, but I forced myself to ignore the discomfort. I took a quick shower and went to bed. A few hours later, in the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange sound. The sheet that covered the mirror was on the floor, and in the reflection there was someone standing behind me. I turned around on impulse, but the room was empty. The mirror, however, clearly showed a dark, motionless silhouette watching me. My instincts screamed to get out of there, but something held me to the bed. My limbs were paralyzed, and the figure in the mirror began to move. The light flickered, and the room plunged into darkness. The sounds of whispers filled the air. Disjointed sentences, muffled voices. The cold became unbearable. When the lights came back on, the reflection was normal. But when I looked at the bedroom door, I saw deep scratch marks, as if someone had desperately tried to get out. I gathered my things in record time and ran out. At the counter, the receptionist looked at me with a mixture of pity and understanding. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked. I nodded without the strength to answer. The last guest of 303 was found dead inside the mirror. He tried to leave, but something didn't let him. I left that hotel and never went back. Since then, I've avoided mirrors at night. What about you? Are you sure you're alone when you look at your reflection? Ever since I was a child, the old house at the end of the street had haunted me. Stories about it were told in whispers, as if the house itself could hear. They said it was cursed, that no one had ever spent a whole night inside without going mad or disappearing. But I, with the arrogance of youth, had never believed in horror stories. Until that fateful night. Curiosity ate away at me. I decided to defy my fear and explore the house. The door creaked as I opened it, as if a ghost were welcoming me. The air was heavy, smelling of mold and something else, a metallic smell that made my stomach churn. As I went deeper into the darkness, the silence was interrupted by the creaking of the floorboards. Suddenly, a cold whisper ran down the hallway. "Go away." I ignored the warning, but fear settled in my heart. Old paintings watched me with dark eyes. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking under my feet. A shadow moved upstairs. The whisper repeated itself, closer now, almost in my ear. "Why are you here?" I turned around, but no one was there. A chill ran down my spine. I reached the last step and felt something cold grab my ankle. Skeletal fingers emerged from the shadows, squeezing my flesh tightly. I screamed and broke free, running to the nearest room. I locked the door, trying in vain to calm my heart. The whisper turned into a blood-curdling scream. The door was thrown against the wall, revealing a pale, misshapen figure. Its eyes were black holes, empty of soul. Terror paralyzed me. The creature approached, its mouth opened in a cruel smile, and darkness swallowed me. I woke up outside the house, bathed in the dim light of dawn. My body was covered in deep scratches, as if sharp claws had attacked me. I got up, staggering, and fled from there without looking back. But the house did not leave me alone. The whispers continued to haunt me, echoing in my mind. I feel like the creature is calling me back, waiting for me to return to finish what it started. I had always been skeptical about the supernatural, until that fateful night that changed my life forever. I had just moved into an apartment on the 8th floor of an old building in the city center. The place was small but cozy, and the view from the window overlooked a narrow, dark alley that few ventured into after dark. The first night, as I was unpacking my bags, I heard a strange noise coming from the street. I looked out the window and saw a man standing in the middle of the alley. He was motionless, wearing a black suit, and his face seemed blurry, as if the darkness was consuming him. I felt a chill, but I tried to ignore it. He was probably just a local. For the next few days he remained there. No matter what time I looked, the man never moved. I began to feel restless. Paranoia grew inside me, and soon I began to notice something even more frightening. Every time I turned off the light in the room and went to bed, I felt a presence. One night, I decided to take a picture of the window to show a friend. When I looked at my phone screen, I froze. The man in the alley was now looking directly at me. Panic took over my body. I closed the curtains, but I couldn't sleep. In the middle of the night, I heard 3 sharp knocks on the window. My blood ran cold in my veins. How was this possible? I was on the 8th floor. Breathing heavily, I gathered my courage and opened a small space between the curtains. The man was there, outside my window, his face now visible. He had no eyes, just empty sockets that seemed to suck in the very light around him. His mouth moved, forming words that I couldn't hear, but I felt a pressure in my ears as if he were inside my mind. I woke up on the floor of the living room with no memory of how I had gotten there. The clock read 3:33 in the morning. The apartment door was unlocked, and a trail of wet footprints led to my bed. But the worst was yet to come. The next day, I went to the building's management to ask about the man in the alley. The super looked at me with an expression of pure horror. "The man in the window? Did you see him?" he asked, almost whispering. I nodded slowly. 30 years ago, a resident of this apartment threw himself out of the window. It is said that his spirit never leaves the building and that he appears to those who are destined to follow the same fate. I left the building that afternoon and never went back. But sometimes at night, I feel a presence near my window. And if I look quickly enough, I swear I see a reflection of someone who shouldn't be there. It was a cold autumn night when Lucas received the first call. The digital clock next to his bed read 3:33 in the morning, a time that always made him uncomfortable. The screen of his cell phone glowed in the dark, displaying a strange number, 0000000000. He hesitated, but the insistent sound made him answer. On the other end there was only silence, followed by heavy breathing. "Hello?" he whispered, his voice trembling. No answer. Just static and something that sounded like distant whispers. Then a female voice, low and distorted, murmured, "Why did you leave me here?" Lucas's heart almost stopped. The sound was faint, but it seemed to be coming from inside his own house. He hung up immediately. He took a deep breath, trying to convince himself that it was just a prank call. But when he looked at the screen of his cell phone again, the phone was still ringing, even after it had been turned off. And then a notification appeared. He pressed play and heard his own voice on the recording. "Help me," his voice said, but he had never said that. Lucas couldn't sleep. He stared at the phone, waiting for the call to end on its own. But suddenly the screen flashed again. New call. Same number. Fear paralyzed his body, but something inside him forced him to answer. This time the voice on the other end was clear. "Do you remember me now, Lucas?" His body froze. That voice, he had heard it before. Suddenly flashes appeared in his mind. A deserted road. An accident. Someone screaming. Lucas realized that it wasn't just a random call. It was a warning. He opened Google and typed his own name. But what he found took his breath away. Newspaper article. Tragedy on the road. Young Lucas Almeida survives accident, but girlfriend disappears without explanation. His heart raced. How could he have forgotten something so important? And then the voice whispered again, this time closer. "Lucas, I never left. The phone fell to the floor. Something was wrong. Lucas felt a chill on the back of his neck as if he were being watched. When he looked at the bedroom door, it was ajar. And in the hallway, someone was standing in the darkness. It was her. Her wet hair dripped onto the floor, and her eyes, empty and lifeless, stared directly into his. "Why didn't you save me?" the voice echoed in his head. Lucas tried to run, but his body wouldn't move. He felt something invisible holding his wrists. The force was cold and suffocating. The light in the room began to flicker, and then the phone rang again. Same number. He didn't want to answer, but he knew he had no choice. With shaking hands, he picked up his cell phone and answered it. In an instant, the presence disappeared. The hallway was empty. But the voice on the phone whispered, "See you soon." The call dropped. And on the cell phone screen, an automatic reminder appeared for the next day. Scheduled call, 3:33 a.m. Lucas never slept peacefully again.